God damn. Been doing this for too long. All right. I think that'll be a fun little thing to carry us into the episode.
Yeah.
You want to get started?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Some might say it's been a long time.
Yes.
Our inconsistency has gotten the better of us.
And just the time of year, really. Hectic things are happening. Weather's changing. Leaves are growing back. Grass is growing. And Brett and I have like a pair of flowers sprouted from the garden of... okay, we're going to end it
this
there.
is supposed to
we're
be,
getting
this is
into
supposed to be
it.
season 3. This is supposed to be season 3, everybody. We're new and improved and doing the same thing, just like you asked for, just like all of you had always wanted. So, as per usual, I am Brett.
And I'm Adam.
And we're bringing you a bunch of college white boy opinions on democratic politics in the Midwest and the world at large. So, without much further to do, this is season 3. We're going to be talking about the Democratic debates in these first 2 episodes, kind of giving you a rundown and all of our thoughts and feelings for what that's worth. Yeah,
so it'll be 2 parts, each 30 minutes long, hopefully. And we'll be just going through our thoughts and feelings prior and after debates, what we thought of the candidates, the issues, and the debate itself. So
make sure you tune in to the next podcast, which will be out some point in the future. Tonight we'll be focusing on the first round of debates between the first 10 candidates. Our next podcast will be featuring the second round of debates, the second 10 candidates. And hopefully, we'll be able to glean some fresh, hot takes off of the 2 hours of content that we were presented with. So.
And then after that, we will be getting back into our normal podcast format, hour-long episodes covering all topics from here in the Midwest to the nation to the world.
Thankfully, it's been slow news days, so it won't seem like we have a ton to recap on.
Yes, exactly.
Without further ado, let's get into these debates.
Right. So last night, 10 potential, sort of, Democratic candidates sparred off in Miami for the first round of debates. So, Brett, let's talk about our initial thoughts going into the debate. What were we expecting? How did we feel about the people? And, just our pre-debate thoughts and feelings. Give it to me.
For this debate, we were looking at New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro, Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, former Congressman John Delaney, Mayor Bill de Blasio, and Washington Governor Jay Inslee. Of course, Bill de Blasio is the New York City mayor. That's a ton of names and a ton of people that most everyday voters have not really heard of. So I think the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about is going into all of this. Obviously, we had some disparity in name recognition in terms of Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, and to a lesser extent, Julian Castro. All of these candidates, obviously the 10 of them, qualified for the debate stage, but really more so Elizabeth Warren has been the pack leader, followed quite a distance by Senator Booker, Senator Klobuchar, and Representative O'Rourke. So going into this, I had a lot of initial concerns about the scale and the gravity of all of the candidates being able to get their 2 cents in. I think 2016 is still haunting me in the sense of we obviously saw the debates get skewed towards which candidates that were not only polling the best, but also getting the most, clicks per article or clicks per video that media agencies were putting out. So it's only further sensationalized this culture of sound bites and hot takes that we have. So I felt like we needed to have these debates structured to kind of evenly distribute a lot of the potential jockeying for that media attention. And my initial reaction was that having Elizabeth Warren, the far front leader, being in this was a clear disadvantage to the rest of them. That was my initial opinion. And then that kind of changed going through the debate. And I think we'll get into that a little bit. But I was mostly excited to hear Elizabeth Warren actually have a microphone in front of her and hear her talk to voters, because I think a lot of people are still apprehensive about her. And so this is a good chance for her to kind of win them over. And then also like Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Representative Tim Ryan, and even Governor Jay Inslee. These are all people I was just curious to hear from because I really didn't know anything about them. So my excitement was tempered not so much because I thought this was going to be a huge knockout debate, but I was excited because I thought we were going to get a lot of information out of this, and I think in the end we did. But of course, we'll get into all that later. What about you, Adam? What were your thoughts and feelings going into this?
Going into it, it's interesting because like the way that these debates are structured is, I think, it's a far better solution than what the Republicans did in 2016, as you mentioned, because they had the one, like half of them were all like the upper polling, and then you had like this B class debate, which no one watched, no one cared about, no one paid any attention to, because why would you? Because no one there is going to be elected. So I thought it was interesting that the Democrats did mix it up, and clearly there is a massive disadvantage in how this thing laid out, but it was that never really became apparent as to who was disadvantaged by the setup, because obviously Elizabeth Warren is the highest poller. She largely is just like, within the margin of error with Biden, or excuse me, with Bernie. But with Biden,
Yeah, and with Biden.
exactly.
Well, Biden's a little bit further.
Yeah, with Biden and Bernie, in the next debate tonight, this is going to be, it clearly separated the two. And so it'll be very interesting to see how tonight's debate will affect yesterday's debate and how the things actually do play out. But what I was really looking for and what I wanted to see, things that you hadn't mentioned, is, interestingly, who would stand out from the individuals that we don't know much of anything about, who haven't gotten any kind of press attention, who have, polling at less than 1%, that kind of thing. And that was, I was curious to see who would kind of break out of that. It's too early to say if anyone broke out of the midfield. The people like O'Rourke, Booker, or Castro, Klobuchar, the people polling, above 2%. It's interesting to see if any of them will who will actually be impacted by that. Other things I looked for was who would be the individual going after Trump the most. As obviously, we have very mixed feelings on whether or not that is an effective tactic, or how useful that will actually be, or other individuals. I was amazed and I was very curious to see who would go after Biden, or who would actually start taking blows at one another on substantive policy levels. And I largely didn't see much of that, but the things that you did see was very interesting. Honestly, that's how I felt. Personally, I was very excited to see Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke and see what they could do, because they've been some of my favorites going into this debate. But it was I think it was quite telling. So, Brett, start us off. Give us your thoughts and feelings on, I guess, the first topic everyone, your initial thoughts, opening statements, that kind of thing. Talk about it.
Yeah, so the way they divided this debate, it was interesting because obviously they had to wrangle with 10 people being up on stage. Everyone was very limited in their time, and there was a wide breadth of issues that they sought to cover in the course of 2 hours. So the issues that they went over in no particular order were immigration, healthcare, gun control, climate change, the economy, abortion, briefly, foreign policy, and a little bit about Donald Trump. This debate was also, they didn't have like traditional ad breaks, which was interesting. The network kind of let them go on for as long as the conversation naturally happens. So the format, at least to me, seemed a little bit more free-flowing, although the commentators often cut candidates off. There were a couple times where they really just let the conversation play out, which I think is helpful in the long run to not only, as you mentioned before, getting to know these candidates, but also in the conversation at large. So a couple important things to note, and I'm still kind of getting into it just because this illustrates some of my initial thoughts, but Elizabeth Warren, as we mentioned, was far way ahead in the polls, and we were expecting this to kind of be her night. She got a lot of time to talk about the economy, which was their opening issue, which was the opening thing. And she really got to shine here in her whole advocacy for, I have all of these plans to tackle this economy that's growing for this very distinct part of the population, but not for everyone else, despite the fact that everyone seems to be happy about it. I think the moderator brought up the fact that something like 60% of Democrats even approve of the economy, or might even be higher than that. Mm-hmm. And so it gave her an opportunity to, I think, allay some of the fears that people have about what they think they know or what they feel like they know about Elizabeth Warren in terms of the broad socialist strokes brought against her. And I'm focusing mostly on Elizabeth Warren here because the first half of this debate, in my opinion, was the Elizabeth Warren show. We had some fun tidbits from everyone else. Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro both gave parts of their opening statements in Spanish, so I think Congressman O'Rourke was the first one to do so, to everyone's surprise. And we'll get into the optics of that later, I'm sure. But I think that she came out of the gate strong. I think that Julian Castro also got from the very beginning the viewers' attention and really just held on to everything it was worth for the remainder of the debate. And he came out at the very beginning in this fashion. And Tulsi Gabbard, to a lesser extent, I thought really took advantage of her opening moment, but I think she kind of squandered it by giving more of her biography rather than answering the question they opened with, because they didn't really give chances for opening statements. They started with questions, and she elected to give an opening statement instead, which I thought was interesting but completely tone deaf. And then Bill de Blasio and Jay Inslee did what they did for the rest of the debate, which was be loud and boisterous and just incredibly entertaining.
So, interestingly, I'm looking at some of the initial breakdown of like how long people talked and what they really talked about, and it's clear to see Elizabeth Warren spoke the third most. However, like a third of her time, so she spoke for a little over 9.5 minutes, but like about 3.5 of them were totally oriented towards the economy, because that's largely been her whole message. Because Elizabeth Warren, along with her large list of achievements, is largely focused upon her interactions and her contributions made to banking regulations and dealing with Wall Street. And especially corporate consolidation was a major part of her message, and I think that it was very good of her to stick onto it. And because she only talked about 4 issues the whole debate, and that was the economy, healthcare, gun control, and climate change. Climate change. Excuse me. Foreign policy. That's all she talked about. And so
and I think. Staying on the topic of what Elizabeth Warren was up to in this debate, as I mentioned, the first half was the Elizabeth Warren show. The second half, they left her out of a lot of the conversations, and she didn't take really, I don't think, any opportunity to butt in. She didn't have to be aggressive in this debate. She was the one with the least to prove, so she really didn't have to be advocating for more time, if you want to call it that, or she didn't have to be interrupting the entire time to get her points in, because everyone pretty much knows what her main issues are. So this was a great opportunity for her to specifically get into her plans to tackle these huge economic problems that we are currently finding ourselves in, and I think are only going to get a lot worse from here. Breaking the candidates down by how much they said, Liz Warren was the third. The top candidate, or the candidate that said the most words, was Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. That actually surprised me, thinking about it in reference to what I actually witnessed, because I don't feel like I remember him making that many points. I remember him being involved in a couple back and forths later on, but there wasn't really anything that he said that just kind of wowed me.
I mean, him and Beto O'Rourke were the two most talkative boys up there. And that was, I thought, kind of surprising, because again, like, they both had their moments to shine, but there were just times that I think that they just caught up, especially Beto O'Rourke, too much with other candidates. And I think that it's interesting because with Beto O'Rourke, we have certain policies that he's strayed from most of the other candidates on. It's certain policies that he likes and doesn't like, and different, these different like plans that people debate over, and he's often gone with others. And so I think that was interesting. And then Booker as well. I mean, one of the major things to talk about during this debate was just like moments where people stood out. And during the opening like questionnaires and that kind of thing, one person that stood out to me was Jay Inslee. And while he had the least amount of talking time, I think that, going off the bat and talking about unions, the moment things opened up, I was heavily impressed by. And again, like, people were able to, like, some of them were able to really stand out in hitting on issues that no one else talked about or doing it first. And this comes into like Beto O'Rourke speaking Spanish, because people like Cory Booker, who, were definitely planning to do that, were, I think, taken a bit off guard by it. And Lord knows we've seen quite a few memes about it, because, which is just fun. Because also Cory Booker is an extremely expressive individual. But that was, I think, a big moment. And I think the first opening part of the debate is all well and good. And I think something that happened that changed things up a bit was the first time that Bill de Blasio interjected. Because that I thought was a major that changed the tone, because like before then everyone was being very civil, waiting their turn, all that kind of stuff, and then I forget I think it was on healthcare or something like this, and then boom, Bill de Blasio just like interrupts and just is the loud New Yorker that he was. And what that opened up as well was it allowed for people like Julian Castro to take Beto O'Rourke to task over certain provisions in immigration law about whether or not we should allow, or whether or not crossing the border illegally should be either it should be a civil offense rather than a criminal one. And I think that was these major moments that were only allowed for by someone being rude to someone else. So
I think probably the best way to go through this, as we've been talking about it, I think I agree we should just go kind of candidate by candidate and talk about what made them special. So Elizabeth Warren, as we've kind of talked to death, her big things were the economy, really. She had an opportunity, and it was interesting. The moderators brought up to her that she joined on to Bernie's healthcare program, which I thought was an interesting way to frame that question, because she has her own healthcare policy largely modeled after his. So it does make it seem like she's kind of playing second fiddle to Bernie and his healthcare policy. But apparently I was the only one that was offended by the framing of that question. She opened up this broader conversation with it, though, that, as you kind of mentioned, we had the candidates involved in a lot more of a roundtable as opposed to a call and response kind of debate. Healthcare was certainly the nexus of this. I think an interesting tactic they employed in this debate was a couple different times they employed like a straw poll where they asked all the candidates to vote. And in terms of healthcare, they asked which candidates would and would not abolish private insurance. And Elizabeth Warren and
Bill de Blasio.
Bill de Blasio were the only two that raised their hands. And then that started this wide conversation that Bill de Blasio kind of set the stage for in terms of interrupting people. But we saw pretty much everyone get a couple of blows in there over this debate of whether or not we should have private insurance. And I think at some point we'll be forced to tackle that in a podcast session. But again, this illustrates the new kind of format that they were using. And again, it allowed Elizabeth Warren to not just bring up what she was about, but bring up how she's going to be different inevitably when she has to square off opposite Bernie Sanders and whoever else decides to be the next leftist candidate in this race.
I think it's certainly going to be that's what I wanted to bring up, because that was a major moment. Not for, I think it really shows a major divide, one that still does exist within the Democratic Party. However, all of them are advocating for some kind of Medicare for all, and I think that's a very bad brand to put on there. It's weird because all of these plans are Medicare for all plans. None of them exclude people. They all give you a public option of some kind, and that's the real key here is devising which one will work, which one's the best. And I think ultimately this came to another transition here. About a topic that I'm sure some of our fellow podcasters were extremely happy to hear when they asked how you deal with passing a lot of these major Democratic policies that we know that Republicans won't sign on to, especially if we don't take the Senate. And so that was I think it was about climate change, that debate that was brought up, but whether or not you'd get rid of the filibuster was certainly something that I think was a very nuanced conversation that they were having up there, and one that I think, who was it that stood out well for that? It was Inslee did that, Warren, I believe Booker did, and I'm not sure that any of the other guys I fully addressed
most of the people with the experience in actual legislative and executive affairs.
So
Representative John Delaney, former congressman from
Maryland.
Maryland. All right, what about him?
Yes, he has been running for president since about 2017 when he announced.
Yeah,
which is
January of 2017 or something like that.
Which is honestly why I believe that he's the only reason he's here is because he was because he's been able to take in donations and support for so long that he automatically qualified for the debate the moment that they announced the regulations, basically because just he's been here for so long. I think interestingly, he had some, he nothing he said was terribly unique. Nothing good he said policy-wise was terribly unique or added much of anything to the debate. There's no major rousing statements that he made on anything. He barely spoke about immigration. He barely spoke about climate change, and the economy was about the only thing that he talked about. But during I think the one thing I truly remember about what he talked about was, it was when they were cutting to a break. It was after everyone is rousing about immigration and concentration camps and how awful the treatment that we've had about this separation and detainment of children and families at our southern border, and then you hear him say something about his grandfather being separated, and then instantly the moderators were like, and we're going, like we're taking a break. We are not dealing with this, and we are saving, basically, at that point it's just like, what are you doing up here? Why are you here? What is the point? Like, I think clearly we should make distinctions about who here is here for the book sales, who here is to push an agenda, and who here is actually going to run for president.
Well, John Delaney said something, and the one takeaway I actually got from him was something that I think Joe Biden is actually going to have to reconcile with, and that we've already actually seen Joe Biden reconcile with. But it was under a question of impeachment. Mm-hmm. And when it got to John Delaney, he kind of hemmed and hawed about it. Or maybe it was the question about whether or not you would prosecute Donald Trump once you're president and he's no longer president. And he did the whole hemming and hawing about the legality of it. But what he brought up was that people weren't asking about whether or not Donald Trump was guilty of some crime. That he brought up this debate of whether or not, quote unquote, voters, whatever the hell that term actually means these days, really wanted Donald Trump to go to jail or to actually pay for any of the crimes he's committed. And this brings up a larger debate kind of in the party of, well, should we be focusing on impeachment? Should we not be focusing on impeachment? Should we be going after Trump as an attack on character? Should we be fighting him in policy and everything? And he was really the only one that kind of brought that up. And I think this speaks to a larger change. We were talking about how every candidate on that stage had a plan in healthcare that was some version of Medicare for all. Well, 4 years in 2016, it wasn't uniform. Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders was pretty much the only one advocating for wide scale. A lot of other candidates were in the middle of saying, well, we like private insurance, we don't really want to get rid of it. We saw Obamacare, that didn't really work. People don't really buy into it. But now, just through the strength of Bernie Sanders' movement, he shifted a lot of the conversation left. But John Delaney saying this thing, which I think a lot of the other progressive candidates kind of agree on, is that Donald Trump in some form needs to pay for his crimes. John Delaney's kind of taking the moderate approach and saying, this isn't what the voters care about. Joe Biden's been having to reconcile a lot of this fake moderate voter that doesn't exist anymore. And that was just very telling to me personally, the kind of candidate that John Delaney is.
Yeah. I found it interesting that he did. I do remember him having this moment where I was like, okay, like there's that is the quality of candidate that I would expect all the time. And that was the thing that I also took away from this debate, is that listening and watching everyone, there was not a time that I felt that there was no perfect candidate up there. There is not the Democratic presidential candidate was not on that stage, because they're not there yet. And that's not to say that none of the candidates up there could be, because they certainly can become that, but they're not there yet. And I think that it will be very cool to see who transforms and does become that that candidate. And I think largely the way that they do that is through talking about, especially with, personal anecdotes and that kind of, stories of basically how do you, at this point, talk about the economic, social, and political pain that we have felt over the past 2.5 years, and for some people far longer, and how do you bring that into a message of hope and change that you can take anywhere in this country. And I think that someone who has really grasped the concept of anecdotes and stories and relating these things personally is Beto O'Rourke.
See, and I think that's his weakness. I do. Because one of the things that I was really looking and listening for last night, or in the first debate, kind of going off of everything you said, we've had a world of suffering over the past 2 years, which isn't to say that people haven't been suffering for time immemorial in this country. There are a lot of grievances we need to redress. But over the past 2 years, a lot of those grievances have been illuminated. And they were illuminated in a way that none of us were anticipating. No one foresaw the Donald Trump candidacy. No one foresaw the Donald Trump nomination. No one foresaw the Donald Trump presidency. And we lost at his game, though Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes. She lost in the important places because we ended up playing his game because we don't have playbooks that tell us how to play a game differently. So when we get up on stage and I hear people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like Tim Ryan, people like Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke get up there and defer from questions by giving some consultant-approved talking point, I want to bash my head against a wall. Because there are a lot of politicians out there who think that we can still use politics as usual and be competitive, much less successful in this rapidly changing political climate that we're currently in. And we've been in it for 2 years now. So when we have people like Bill de Blasio, Jay Inslee, Elizabeth Warren, who are and Julian Castro, especially Julian Castro, who are taking the questions and answering them as a person, not as someone who has had all of their points formulated, I think that behooves us, and I think that'll help whoever the candidate ends up being, whether or not it's any of those people, but to serve as a kind of example. I think Beto O'Rourke is a great storyteller, and I would like to see him get back to that place as opposed to what I felt was in the first night a lot of mechanical and calculated responses. I mean, that is the epitome of what his opening statement was with presenting it first in Spanish. It just all felt too drawn up and scripted, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that, I do think that, I think he has the potential, because I think that basically what the candidacy, road and campaign is basically who can tell the best story, because stories get votes, and that's what we have to look for. And I think that, I mean, granted, going through this list real quick, I think the people that really have that ability are, and it shows, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, and Amy Klobuchar. And I think that those are the people that are up there actually running for president. And then the people with agendas largely to push things in certain directions are Julian Castro, who has become a major force in the immigration debate. And it was shown last night what he talked most about and what he cares most about is immigration. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially being, a congressman and a part of the candidates, the cabinet of the Obama years from Texas.
Former mayor from San Antonio.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant there. I think that, people like Tulsi Gabbard up there have a message about foreign policy that speaks well, and that's basically why she's here. Because she's had a highly problematic past in some regards, but the thing that she talked most about, and even so, she has very problematic, issues about her past, a meeting with Assad and that kind of thing. But foreign policy, especially around military affairs, has been her major talking point, and I think that that's important. And then Jay Inslee has labeled himself as the climate change candidate, and I think that last night he did not enough to really make that terribly apparent, though I think that he has the capability to do so. So if we want to get into him real quick, he is the governor of Washington, and he largely what I saw from him last night that impressed me was his ability to hit on points that other people hadn't talked about before, and make those very apparent. Like, as I mentioned, unions, but also in the very stupid way that they did describe in 1 to 2 words, like the largest geopolitical threat to the United States. He said Donald Trump and was the only one on stage to name the current sitting president. And I think that, while he has labeled himself as this climate change candidate, I don't think he did enough. Obviously, that's what he talked most on last night, but he also spoke the least, and I think has a much, I think that if he is going to draw the debate towards climate change and make that very apparent, that I think he needs to make that central because we know that he's not going to win the presidency, but we know that he has the capability to make that issue, one of the top 3 things discussed. And
right.
And so I think that's what he has to offer to this debate. So
yeah, and I think his performance in the first debates and his presence on that stage, people want to criticize the Democrats for sending 20 people, and we have 25 people in the field right now, but Governor Inslee, Tulsi Gabbard, Tim Ryan, to an extent, they all are seemingly what we can call one-issue voters.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and Jay Inslee being the climate candidate, the self-proclaimed climate candidate, helps to bring that conversation forward. Mm-hmm. More so than it's being taken, more seriously than it's being taken. And I think part of that is when we got into the climate change part of this debate, as you mentioned, all the candidates had an opportunity to, and this was at the very end, all the candidates had an opportunity to say what was the biggest geopolitical threat in the world right now. Like 5 of the 10 named climate change at all.
Yeah.
And then climate change as a topic was only talked about for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of room for Jay Inslee to have a lot of influence here in forwarding that conversation.
And I think importantly to point out, only 5 of the candidates talked about climate change at all throughout the night. And that was Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, Tim Ryan for about 10 seconds, John Delaney, and Jay Inslee. And of those people, Beto O'Rourke and Jay Inslee were the ones that talked about it the most. And so I think that he has room in this debate to really draw that topic out, because I was amazed at how short the climate change section was. I was very surprised at that, especially in regards to topics like gun control, which I really don't like how they subjected that, because basically what they did was they said, here's a policy that we are subjecting all of you to agree with. Talk about how you agree with this policy. And I don't think it provided much insight into any of their actual opinions or their thoughts, and it basically just let Amy Klobuchar talk about her Uncle Dick and his deer stand. And that was about the only remarkable part of that section. Because they all, I think that this is some of the issues that we have, is because during these debates that make them, mundane and repetitive, is the fact that we don't let the candidates disagree. And when they do, we don't let them really hash things out, because we have such a heavy field. And I think that is something that I look forward to seeing thin out. And I'm looking forward to see how the little nuances and policy disagreements will really, once we get down to one stage of candidates, one night, to see how that will really develop. And so I think that it's very important for these one issue candidates to really come forward strong at the moment and really push as hard as they can. And I think Julian Castro did a wonderful job of that last night. And I thought that him fighting with Beto O'Rourke over Section 13 was great. And it wasn't just, I think it first, I was disappointed in how Beto kind of handled that, and the 70% tax rate question that he dodged very politically, which ultimately is both good and bad. I really wasn't expecting him to be yes, I buy into this single policy and I will do this, because obviously he's not the candidates are not expected at this point to have policies on everything. They're not all expected to be Elizabeth Warrens, and that's very good because people like Pete Buttigieg have like no policies whatsoever. So it's important that these that the people that really care about these one issue topics are very, very present, and I think that Castro is a great example of that.
Right. Yeah, so for this debate, they actually opened with the issue of immigration. To date this video, the day of the election was the day when there was an incredibly moving photo released from the border of a father and 23-month-old daughter had drowned trying to cross the border due to a metering policy that we have in place in this country that if you are denied at one of the legal ports of entry, you can't be readmitted there. You have to either go through a certain waiting period or attempt to enter through a different port of entry. And just through the time delays and the issues we're having down at the border, apparently this family had tried to cross illegally and ended up drowning. And so this was obviously a huge criticism of the Trump administration, what's going on down at the border, but it was the very first thing presented to the candidates, very fresh in everyone's minds. And obviously there's a lot of emotion that goes into this topic, and Julian Castro stepped up to the plate and knocked it out of the park. I think that a lot of people are expecting him to be the obvious candidate for the Latinx community, and for maybe not so much Texas as Beto's maybe seen as the candidate for Texas, but some of the more diverse South even is seen as being Julian Castro territory. And what I think he did is he made a name for himself in someone who is a advocate for this huge civil rights issue facing this country. And he came at it, as I mentioned earlier, not as someone with calculated statements and pre-approved quips, but someone who was just genuinely passionate about this. And he brought up that statute in Section 13 that deals with probably one of the main issues that is causing a lot of the problems we're having down in terms of the manufactured immigration crisis. It's because we're treating this as a felony and not a civil offense. We're arresting all these people. We're having to separate the families because it's a institutional roadblock put in the way intentionally.
Yeah.
And I think and I go back and forth on, I think some of the blanket ask all of the candidates the same question or go up and down yes or no on a certain viewpoint. I think that has its moments, and I think it was sometimes used better than others. But Julian Castro putting forward to all of the other candidates to say everyone needs to be on the same page in making and repealing that federal crime of crossing the border. It needs to be back to a civil offense. We need to get back to a place of sanity, and then let's reform going from there. I think him forcing Beto to be open about that is going to be something that helps all of the candidates grow. And that's that's a preview of what this whole cycle of debates should be, is that it's presenting all of the different candidates with all of the different ideas from across the Democratic Party. Because as you and I both saw, we have just a menagerie of opinions and a menagerie of political views, ranging from the extreme left to even the moderate right among all of these 20 candidates, much less the 10 on stage. So I think that was a productive segment, and I think Julian Castro has a lot more to prove. I think he probably is the one that gained the most tonight, or in this debate. I think he really took the opportunity and ran with it.
Oh, I think so too. And I think largely one of the major factors in him going after Beto O'Rourke is the fact that I think that their voter base is very similar. They're fighting over the same group of people largely, and I think that is something major of note, and it makes a lot of sense why Castro would target O'Rourke in that way, because largely those two are both Texans. They both have major support from the Latinx community, and I think that listening to Beto O'Rourke I don't think it did a spectacular job of really talking about that, but his constituency in Texas and the candidate and congressman that he made way for after retiring was the first Latinx female to be elected to Texas's Congress from that district. And so I think that, with the district, it's very important that I think that he continue to be that do a very good job in talking about that his the work that he has done with the Latinx community, because especially if you look at who supports, like, the demographics that support these candidates, it becomes very important to see how some of their messages become not so much tailored, but become directed towards these communities. And I think that, without having, because we are the Big Tent Party, and I think without having a hand in every faction, you are really going to struggle in some cases. And I think that while he's not, he's on stage tonight, I think that that's something that the largest front runner who has absolutely no diversity in his base is Buttigieg. And whether or not he
and Biden, I think they both suffer from a similar fate.
Biden polls the best with African American voters, and I'm not sure about Latinx voters, but I know that he is the highest approval of African American voters, and so I think that's something
good
that
for Uncle Joe, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, whether or not you.
I don't think he deserves that vote, but that's just me playing identity politics with all of it.
Well, I mean, whether or not you credit that to him being the vice president to the first African American president of the United States.
He got the vote by association.
I largely think that we will see whether or not that is the case largely. And I think that especially when you consider I think I was looking at some polls and looking into it, and largely at this point there's very little that you can take away from putting candidate against candidate, but I think what these debates and what this does is it really starts fleshing out who has support of different people, different demographics, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think tonight's debate will be major in deciding all of this and how it actually plays out. But who else do we have to talk about quickly? You want to talk about Gabbard?
We'll wrap up the last few that didn't really make a lasting impression.
Nope.
I think Tulsi Gabbard, she is the angles that she has to play is that she is a major in the Army, I think is what she is. If she has a combat record, she's playing the military angle, and I think that's going to be the one trick that she has through the rest of this campaign, however much longer that lasts for. I think she suffered from the consultant class talking points at the beginning, but as we actually got into the 2 seconds of foreign policy we did, I think she took that opportunity to shine, and I think you saw that bump in her popularity as a result from that.
Yeah.
What you got on her?
I think that largely, her moment to come forward was really her sparring off with Tim Ryan, and I think that they both had two very different messages for what foreign policy in America should look like. And Gabbard is largely for non-interventionism, bringing troops home, that kind of thing, while Tim Ryan talked about a very 2000 Gore type stance, this old Clinton politics of being this humanitarian force for good militarily across the world. And I think that was a very interesting dynamic that Ryan, I think that that's also been a major debate within the Democratic Party, that I think as the winds have significantly changed towards more of a non-interventionist type program. And so I think that will be very interesting to see how this plays out. And I think that you're right, that Gabbard has she is one issued, and that issue is the military and American foreign policy. And I think that it'll be very interesting to see, because we didn't see any of this last night, but going forward, a subject that I certainly look forward to looking, to hearing more about is how they feel about trade, Trump's tariffs, and really diving into the age-old debate ultimately within the Democratic Party, which is how protectionist are you versus how liberal are you in regards to free trade. And I think thus far the only person who I know for a fact on is, who has plans is, Elizabeth Warren with her economic patriotism, and Bernie Sanders with his slightly more protectionist policies, which personally I don't like, but I think that those two are the only ones with some kind of clear message on that front. So,
right. And I think one of the important takeaways from both Tulsi Gabbard and Tim Ryan being in this is not even necessarily a takeaway, but it's interesting that they got into foreign policy. I think both of them, that's going to be their big issue throughout this debate, or throughout this campaign, rather. So going forward, if they do make it to the next debate, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit more emphasis on foreign policy and the Middle East, especially as things continue to ramp up there. Kind of in a similar vein, Amy Klobuchar is, in my opinion, but in a different way, also kind of a one-note candidate or a one-issue candidate. However, it's not so much issue-based. Her whole campaigning strategy is based around who she is and her record in the Senate. And who she is fundamentally is a Democrat from the Midwest, a Democrat from the Rust Belt, who, in a different world, I think would say represent Midwestern Democratic politics perfectly, because I think she does come from a place that we would probably typically assume is a little more moderate. Yes, Minnesota is traditionally a blue state, but
Minnesota's been hella progressive historically.
Right, but I think she also is representing this workforce that we, for some reason, write off in every other state as being inherently conservative, because it is a state that is predominantly their main export is labor and is energy. So this is a place that isn't Silicon Valleys of the world. It's not California or New York, but it's a Democratic state in the Midwest. So why don't we use this as a model to extrapolate? Obviously, part of the 36%, we want to focus on Democratic politics in the Midwest. But for some reason, she seems to be focusing on, in some weird tinge of, I am the candidate that can build the bridges and bring both sides of the aisle because I come from a place that is of the old Democratic Party that seems to be lost in the wilderness or lost to the Republican Party. However, I think she's failing to cut through with that message. Yeah. And so going forward, she's going to have to figure out either a better way to tell her story or a better way to illustrate her ability to not necessarily work in a bipartisan fashion, but to be the person that can beat Trump. Because if you're not going to beat him with policy by convincing the American people that the progressive way is the way that we need right now, then you need to be able to convince the American people that you can get up on that stage opposite Donald Trump and defeat him. And I think she has a lot to be desired, at least for me personally, before she gets there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that her message about basically being able to win in the Midwest is an important one, and I think that largely she's done a very good job of that. And whether or not you truly count Minnesota to be equal to places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Indiana, and that kind of, basically everywhere in Illinois besides Chicago, that is something that she has some experience with, and that is something that she largely does bring that's unique from all the other candidates up here that actually have a viable shot of winning the presidency. And, while she, I think, really has also another very unique thing that Amy Klobuchar last night had some great zingers that were largely interrupted by the moderators. And I think that the moment that she really stood out, that was basically when Jay Inslee was talking about, as governor, he's the only person up here who has actually made real substantial change in regards to providing women reproductive freedoms and that kind of thing. She was like, oh, we have three women up here who have done a lot and fought hard for that, and no doubt that they have done that. But I think it was an interesting distinction between the ability to have a government under Jay Inslee that is all Democratic, that is actually able to achieve these kinds of goals, right, and then one Amy Klobuchar has obviously fought for the freedom and women's rights for a long time, and continues to do so. But when you are one of 46 Democrats in in Congress, that you can't do shit about it, so it doesn't matter. And
yeah, I thought that was every time Jay Inslee was the one I'm the only one who's done this, that, or the other. I'm like, yeah, because you come from Washington State, but it's as blue as blue can be.
Yep. Well, I mean, largely I think that but it also does lend, Washington is not consistently reliably blue. And while, statewide, it's still a very, rural state in some areas. And so I think it's very interesting to see, some of these divides up there.
Right.
Yeah. So
overarching points.
well, we haven't talked about
Let's-
De Blasio much. So do you want to cover him quickly?
I think with De Blasio and the rest of them that we haven't really touched on. I think as we approach the hour mark here, let's go through each of them. Let's give a hot take, 280 characters, one tweet for each
All right.
candidate. Wrap up your final thoughts. So, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, what's your hot take?
All right, Warren, I think did a great job last night, and her most telling tale will be when she faces off with Bernie Sanders, and I'm looking forward to that.
Liz Warren, eat the rich, change the country through socialism,
But also,
but the good kind.
yeah, and still be supported by moderate to middle of the road Democrats while doing it.
She's gonna have to convince all of those people to get on board with her, but if Bernie could do it, so can Warren. And I think she's better than Bernie.
Yes, I think hands down.
All right, Congressman O'Rourke.
Drop the punditry and pick up the blue jeans. Pick up your best pair of cowboy boots. Throw on that 10-gallon and go hit the road talking about how you're going to make America a far better place for everyone. And I think that's how he moves on from this debate. So
Great again. You meant to say great again. Beto, I want you to stop being a robot. Start being human for 10 seconds of your life. Do a kickflip. Do some breaking and entering. Play a guitar. That's all I want from you. Nothing more, nothing less. Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. What you got?
Cory Booker, the most energetic, loving, expressive, Spanish-speaking individual up there. I think that what he really needs to do is talk about how he has lived in a low-income housing community that's largely, African American and minority, and he needs to be. Cory Booker needs to win over the nation, and most of all needs to win over the base that he can relate largest to, and that's largely the African American community.
Right. Senator Booker, he's fun. I would 110% invite him to my birthday party if I knew him like that. Cory, you're invited. End of April. Let me know. I'll send you the Facebook invite. Do I want him to run for presidency? Probably not right now. I think he's fun. He's a cool politician. He's great in New Jersey, but probably not on this stage.
Yeah. Honestly, his biggest flaw is the fact that he is from New Jersey.
Yeah, of all the things, it's because
I'm
he's
not
in New
afraid
Jersey.
to say that. I'm not afraid to. We can leave that in. All right.
Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. Hot take.
All right, Amy. I'm sad that she needs to. Okay. Get your hot takes and your zingers in before the moderators can cut you off. And talk about Midwesterners, and that's how you'll win over the overwhelming support of the 36%.
Amy Klobuchar, she needs to pull out a comb. She needs to use it. We want to see her get angry and yell at somebody. That's what the people want. She needs to give it to the people.
Yep. It will not hurt her to be angry, and despite the fact that Fox News will call her hysterical and crazy for being an angry woman, I think that is what we deserve from her.
Good. I want to see her opposite Donald Trump, and I want to see her throw some punches.
Yeah, because she can. Oh, she has the
She
overwhelming
absolutely
ability to. Oh, yeah.
San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro. Hot take.
I think that he would be a great vice president. There's my hot take.
Julian Castro for Secretary of something important, dare I say, Housing and Urban Development. He is a great future leader of the Democratic Party, and I'm excited that he's around, and I want to keep him on stage to continue to yell at everyone else.
Oh, yeah, no, he needs to stay in for as long as it makes sense for you to be there, my friend.
Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan. Hot take.
Tim Ryan needs to get some sleep, use a makeup artist, and somehow make himself. I have no idea how he will stand out or do anything that will make him be a viable candidate, if any, but find your message and find your issue and get that great book sale, man. Get that book sale.
Tim Ryan, the candidate 10 months from now, I'll be reminded, was a part of the Democratic primary.
Yeah, kind of like Rick Webb.
Exactly like Rick Webb.
Who I'm like...
Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaii Congresswoman. Hot take.
Why are you here when when you could be in Hawaii? That's my question. It's like, I get it. Like, you care deeply about the military and your brothers and sisters in uniform, as you mentioned, and I think that you have, I always appreciate this, the service, and I think that's greatly important, and I think that she's a very unique voice in that regard on the stage. But you could be drinking pina coladas with a surfboard in Maui, and I don't know why you're here.
I'll say Tulsi Gabbard, our dream candidate in the year 2000.
Yeah, pretty much.
Former Congressman John Delaney. Hot take.
Man, this is... I think the hottest take you can talk about John Delaney is... he's a lot like warm mayonnaise. And, like, we're talking just mayonnaise that has been left out on, like, a hot day. That's about it. That's all I got. Why are you here?
I want this to stop. I want this to stop before it even started.
That's what that's my hot take. Is warm mayonnaise.
I'll say John Delaney, his polling numbers were best in January 2017.
When he was the only candidate.
All right, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Hot take.
Ah, yes, the Trump of the Democratic candidates. Well, I think that if it was a brawl, like a physical brawl, he would be a top-tier contender against Elizabeth Warren. However, I think that since it's not, I think that, I don't know if I enjoy him being there, and I don't know if I want him to be there, but I have very mixed emotions, and that's about the best you're going to get from me.
I'll say Bill de Blasio. Put him on a stage with Kirsten Gillibrand and Donald Trump, and we'll find out who the real New Yorker is.
Yeah, no, for real. Though, honestly...
And
we'll really see the distinction between New York and the rest of the state there. Because whether or not Kirsten Gillibrand is a New Yorker is up for question.
All right, and last but not least, Washington Governor Jay Inslee. Hot take.
If there weren't such other great candidates, he would be my top candidate. And I can't say that for all of these people. I like Jay Inslee a lot. I really do. And I think that he is a great governor, and I think that he will probably continue being a great governor, and that's about the highest office he'll ever achieve, but I appreciate him being here, and I want to see more, I want Jay Inslee to literally just go Armageddon on the stage about how we're all going to, lose coastline, and all the polar bears are going to die, and I want him to go full on Al Gore. And that's what I want from him. And that's all I need from him.
I'll say Jay Inslee, my favorite future Secretary of the Interior.
Yeah. Nope, for real. Honestly, though, there should be a department that just deals with climate change.
I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. It's probably about 20 years past due, but
yeah, for real,
we absolutely should have one of those.
Like, Homeland Security should be separated into two fields. One of them about...
Yeah. You would think that climate change would involve homeland security. It's security of the homeland.
Yeah, considering we're losing homeland as we speak.
God forbid.
Except
all right, so final takeaways from the first Democratic debate. What's your total thoughts and feelings after having witnessed it, looking forward?
I think that it's certainly not perfect, and as I think I said this earlier, but we do not have our candidate yet. We didn't have it last night, and we won't have it tonight. However, I think we clearly saw some highlights of what we want from a candidate, And I think going forward, I truly hope that we can, have a full-bodied candidate that can take down Donald Trump and win not only a majority of votes again, like we did in 2016, but get enough of those everywhere that we win the presidency. So,
right. I think overarching, the biggest thing I took away from this was the Democratic Party has come a long way from 2016. And what I mean by that is where we looked around and we saw Hillary Clinton as debatably being our best candidate, only seconded by Bernie Sanders, two incredibly divisive figures within the Democratic Party. We now have a gigantic field of candidates that will continue to serve in the Democratic Party in their individual capacities and illustrate an incredibly promising future. And I think the first debate illustrated, and the second debate will only reiterate that we also now have a much more cohesive message of the Democratic Party. Though 2 hours is not enough time to talk about our stances on everything, I think we're all coming around to accepting that Democrats stand for free higher education, whether that's 2 years in a community college or full 4-year public education. We all agree that we need public option and Medicare for all, and however that looks, and that we are the party that is redressing and representing underrepresented and minority groups in this country, and that these are the important things we stand for, and as well as moving the country forward despite climate change and investing in clean energy and the economic opportunities that'll bring. I think people are realizing that as these are the tenets of the Democratic Party, and all of the candidates are espousing those pretty equivocally. So we've moved further to the left, and we're at a point, honestly, that I think everyone is really hopeful and optimistic about, and hopefully it'll be an incredibly energizing force going into 2020. So I'm walking away from it hopeful for the future, but not necessarily in love with any one of the candidates as an individual.
Yep, pretty much. So anyways, guys, I hope that you enjoyed Brett and I's our analysis of the first debate. Give us feedback, tell us what you thought. As always, you can find us on Twitter at the 36% with an actual percent sign. And always on Podbean and everywhere else you get your podcasts. So anyways, hope you enjoyed. Look for this episode and our one talking about the debate that occurs tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, because it is the best time zone down in Miami, where we see the other 10 square off. So I guess out with a further ado.
Wow, season 3. Season changes.
Season 3 has begun.
Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Have a good evening and good night.
The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music in this episode is provided by Purple Planet. You can check them out at purple-planet.com.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
The audio engineering for this episode is done by Bert Crumbs.
Our ukulele muse, as always, is Adam California.
Our scheduling for this episode was done by Yorkie March to the Sea Sherman.
And no research or outlining was done by Ben Sherman this episode. However, we can also thank our technical difficulties to the MSNBC broadcasting staff. And
someone who had nothing to do with that, but who did create our wonderful cover art, was Christian Ferguson.
So anyways, and special thanks to the 4 Democrats that are running for president that did not make it into any of these debates. You guys are the real backbones and winners of all of this. Get those book sales, boys.
And a special thanks to all of you tuning in. We're sorry that it was such a long wait, but we're back with some sort of semblance of season 3.
Yeah.
So don't worry, you'll get all of the opinions you didn't ask for at the 36%.
So thanks for listening.
As always, I'm Brett.
And I'm Adam.
And this has been
the 36%.
36%.
I think we might need to redo
That was probably in sync. I imagine.
It was. I'm gonna imagine. We need to take off the headphones for that bit. So, anyways, we'll do the. Thanks for listening. I'm Brett. I'm Adam thing. So, all right. So.
I mean, worst case, if it's not synced up, I'll just kill one of our tracks, so at least one of us says it.
Okay.
Because I think trying to sync it up is going to be a nightmare.
Usually it is. What I do, man, that was. Oh, I think I said
I'm cutting the recording.
Sounds good. All right, I am stopping as well.